Good morning and welcome to Salve Regina University. I'm Michael Semenza, Vice President of University Relations here at the university, and I welcome you to our beautiful campus on what could not be a more beautiful day. This is just a continuation of a really great partnership of Newport Hospital and Salve Regina University as two of the anchor institutions of Newport working together. Our president, Dr. Kelly Armstrong, gives her great wishes to you today. She's sorry she couldn't be here, but we're also very proud that the head of the hospital, Krista Duran, is a Salve graduate, and we don't have to remind her that because she's always over here helping us too with our students. It's a really great partnership. You know, all of this partnership is supported and encouraged to next levels by the Grubin Charitable Foundation and Diana Early. She has been absolutely wonderful to Newport Hospital and certainly to Salve here in helping us with our programs and the facilities that support those programs. So we thank Diana very, very much for all she does to bring people together. A special thanks today to all of our speakers, and I can't mention all, but including Christophe, Sauerwein, and to Constant Mouton, to Judith Landau, and to Patricia Amsalem. We're honored to have you here and have you here again, and so thank you, and we look forward to you being common faces on our campus. You know, to have this symposium today, what you're going to get to see in the midst of this is what you just saw is all the football players making sure that they were at their 8:30 class, and you'll see this, and some were just by the skin of their teeth, I noticed. But you'll get to see, you know, a day in the life of Salve too, and we're really grateful for that because, you know, here, a university started by the Sisters of Mercy who have always dedicated themselves to helping others, to the real needs of others. You know, we're honored to be able to have strong science programs, healthcare programs, great nursing programs, psychology, social work, behavioral sciences, as you've seen, and then obviously history and the arts and politics and everything that comes together. So we hope to get each of you to get to know us a little bit more like that too. So thank you, as I said. Special thanks also to many, but including Erin, Loriana, Rich, and all the team at Newport Hospital Lifespan, and to Johanna and all the team at Salve. I think together it truly was one team in bringing this together, and we're grateful for each person behind the scenes who makes these things happen. So it's my honor now to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Gaines, Vice President Medical Affairs and Chief Medical Officer of Newport Hospital. As a valued member of the emergency team at Newport Hospital for more than a decade, and chair of Medical Executive Committee, co-chair of the Physicians Provider Advisory Council, president of the medical staff from 2015 to 2017. He brings steadfast leadership and strategic vision to the hospital. A clinical assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Warren Alpert Medical School. He has studied healthcare management at Harvard University. And so I could go on in the many, many accomplishments and give you an even longer list, but instead I give you Dr. Gaines. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Michael, and thank you. I echo his sentiments for the foundation, for Salve for hosting this event, and for everyone in attendance. Such an important topic, and I really am looking forward to hearing some of the speakers. It was controversial to start off with a joke. There was a story that I just heard that started off with two yoga teachers go for a walk in the woods, and it sounds like the beginning of a riddle, but was actually kind of a touching thought where a couple of yoga instructors were out for a walk in the woods, and they come across one of those tour guides with a person that was taking a bunch of tourists around, and they were just going to zip past because they wanted to just be in the woods and breathe what the trees were breathing, but then they heard them say, the tour guide asked people how these huge redwood trees had been here for hundreds and hundreds of years when the conditions, they're on the side of a mountain, the ground is really loose, and some of you may have heard this story before. So they stopped to hear the discussion about how these trees came to survive and thrive in this really difficult environment for so long. And when he went on about the story, he got to the point that it really is the key of what happens underground, that while you see these gigantic trees and the branches up in the top in the air, the way that they can really thrive and hold together is down underground, because what happens down in the roots is as the trees come together, the roots intertwine, they hold on to each other, and if you look around and step out to see the forest despite the trees, there's a huge network of roots that tie all of us together. And I think it's an interesting metaphor for what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to say that each of us alone would not stand a chance on the side of a mountain in loose ground, and with the winds and things, we would all fall over. But with the roots that we all tie together with this sort of a network of people, what we can accomplish is really compelling. So the hospital, obviously, very committed to that cause. The foundation, we appreciate all the generosity, both for the hospital and for these events, and to the university for hosting this. So thank you for everyone for coming to this. I think we're all, in the end, seeking happiness. We're all seeking well-being, pleasure, whatever terminology you might use in different contexts and different cultures. I think when we consider short-term versus long-term, that's, to me, where the bridge of the mental health professions and addiction medicine come in. As Michael mentioned, I'm an emergency physician, so I am by no means a mental health expert, so I apologize if I sound a little bit elementary in terms of my understanding of mental health. But I do know that the fascinating thing for me is our brain is sort of a soup of chemistry, and there are receptors and chemicals, and every substance that you can think of that can lend itself to addiction all either mimic or directly act on our brain in the same way as chemicals that are already there. So I'd step back for a minute in my own mind and think that if we can better figure out ways of adjusting those levels of chemicals or making a balance in our own mind without requiring outside versions of those same chemicals, then there is a chance that we can find a balance. And so for me, that's been my own personal quest to try to find that perfect balance. And sometimes it's as simple as taking a deep breath and just being mindful and thinking of something that you care about. So it doesn't really take much in the short term to be able to accomplish that. And I think the more we can spread that word, then some of our patients who are really just looking for a short-term relief of their pain and their discomfort or a short-term pleasure can start to see the value of doing that internally and potentially finding ways to become more mindful and with a goal of more long-term health and balance. So it's a bit pie in the sky. But I certainly do vision, especially here with the community that we have in Newport, with the support that we have here locally and with some of the expertise that we have, that we can become and already are becoming a glimmer of something quirky and interesting is happening here in Rhode Island and on this island. There's some pretty fun things happening here, and so people will start to pay more attention to what's going on and realize that there's something to be here. We have some pretty brilliant minds, and we have some amazing support. And when those two things come together, we can accomplish some pretty incredible things. So one thing that I found that's frustrating, and this really does help supplement, is that in medical school and in medical education here in the US, we tend to learn almost nothing about nutrition, about sleep, about exercise, or really about mental health or behavioral health at all. We really learn about disease and how to try to correct disease. And so I think any effort that we can, both locally and in the community, and I have an interest in public health, where we can try to educate people on how to, what is better, eggs or oatmeal? I don't know, like every email or every time I open the news, it's different. I can't seem to figure that out. I mean, I think exercise is a good thing. That I think we could probably all agree on. We could probably all get a little more sleep, especially after football Sunday. But the mental health piece and how they all intertwine together, I think is really fascinating. So again, thank you to everyone for coming and helping bolster our education in those critical topics. It's also my pleasure to introduce John Brett, who runs our partial hospitalization program. He's floating around here. I don't have eyes on him, but he's here somewhere. So, yeah. Oh, there he is. Good. I met John. I've been down in the emergency department for about 10 years, and I think of the emergency department as the sympathetic nervous system of the healthcare industry. It's you put a big red sign out in front of your hospital that says emergency, and then you just stand there and see what happens, and it's constant chaos, and everybody's screaming, and it's madness. And when things go particularly off the rails, then John does a debrief session with the staff to help kind of bring them back to reality and remind them of the why that we do things. And so he kind of brings the parasympathetic nervous system to the hospital and to the staff. And I've been part of some Schwartz rounds and some really amazing organizational things that John has done for the hospital and for the staff. And so he really does bring the parasympathetic, not just the rest and digest part, but really the healing and the creativity, which is critical to that balance. And so I think we could all stand to step back from the sympathetic surge and the craziness of life, take a few deep breaths, and get a little bit more in the healing and creativity. So John's always been an influence in my world that way. And so I thank you for that, and thank you for your help in coordinating this. Thank you to the rest of the staff for putting this together. So without further ado, I will introduce John Brett, and thank you again for everything.
So we're doing thank yous at the beginning, obviously, and one of the things I'd like to say thank you to is everybody who's here today, because we did put this thing together pretty quickly, and I know a lot of people work at agencies and have practices and things like that, so to be able to make this day available is not always easy. So the fact that you were willing and able to do that, we need to express our appreciation for that, because people out in the field, it's not an easy thing to take a day off, so we do appreciate that for sure. Also, of course, you know, as everybody said, the Grubin Foundation and Newport Hospital and Sauerwein coming together very quickly and very efficiently also to put today together has been great. And to our speakers who've been spending an extremely long, arduous weekend at the Cape Cod Symposium and taking an extra day to come to Newport to sort of speak to us. So we're really honored that we have internationally renowned and acclaimed speakers who are here with us today that were able to sort of take that extra day and be with us. So we'll give them an extra cup of coffee or whatever they need. Okay. So yeah, just thank you to everybody. And you know, we're just glad you're here. We're working hard on making a dent in the substance use problem in Rhode Island, and particularly on Aquidneck Island. And we were talking before about the two biggest barriers to people getting to treatment is, number one, access to treatment, and number two, it's stigma. So anytime we can meet and talk and educate and expand our knowledge, I think we're making a dent in stigma. So that's part of our mission today, and it's extremely important. And as I said, we're very honored to have people that we have here today that we otherwise ordinarily would not have heard from. So we're going to get started pretty quickly, and I'm going to kind of guide the day through the speakers. And I've been given the job to stay on schedule, so that's not always easy. But we'll see if we can do that, and I'll just kind of remind people as we go along and talk about lunch and all that, CEUs and all that as we go. So, you know, let's get started with the program. Excuse me. Our first speaker is Christophe Sauerwein. Okay, and Christophe is an independent psychotherapist, accredited FDAP in the United Kingdom, with prior long experience working in different addiction and trauma treatment centers. He has been on this journey of recovery from multiple addiction and family of origin relational trauma since 1999. After a 17-year career in investment banking and private equity, Christophe turned his life over and became a leading therapist in addiction, relational childhood trauma, and dysfunctional relationships. Christophe holds a master MSc in addiction psychology and counseling, and is qualified in childhood trauma reduction therapy and attachment and relationship disorders. From a pan-European cultural background, Christophe works with English and continental European patients in English and French, and integrates clients' native language and cultures of origin perspectives. Christophe also sits on the board of directors as academic director of the International Conference on Addiction and Associated Disorders, the largest European conference in the field, and regularly gives conferences around Europe. Christophe has a strong interest in academics and in increasing and pursuing his own personal research around psychology, philosophy, and sociology. And the name of his presentation today is The Unfortunate Pathway, When Misparenting Leads to Developmental Immaturity and Ends in Addiction or Co-occurring Disorders. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me well? Right, okay. Just a bit of housekeeping. How long do I have?
Yes, 10:15.
10:15? Excellent. Do that. Right, so I think... Yeah, here we go. Excellent, thank you. Just as an opening, thank you so much for allowing me to be back this year. I had such a great experience last year. Maybe some of you were there. It was absolutely fantastic. And it's also beautiful for me to see that from an evening moment, we're landing into a day moment. Now, what about a week moment next year? So it's beautiful to be here. So thank you so much. I feel very privileged. It is so important that we travel the world and carry the message and reflect together and challenge together what we're addressing and try to think a little bit outside the box, outside from our daily struggles, and we have to face with so many patients. It's so difficult. Let's pause and let's try to have an open mind. And today, I may challenge those beliefs. I may go with some ideas that maybe goes against habits of treatment, habits of looking at things. So bear with me, and it's okay to disagree. Things coexist. They're not black and white. It's not like this or like that. So it's a process that I'm inviting you to follow with me today. One word about the title. Unfortunate is the key word here. It's not necessarily awful, dramatic, oh my God. It is just really sad. And it doesn't have to be dramatic to fall into a necessity for treatment. Unfortunate is the guiding word here for me. Because I work with a lot of patients, and as you said, thank you, Dr. Brett, for your introduction. I work with this triangle where what happened as a child, as a teen, ripples into adulthood, leads into adaptive mechanism, addiction, or whatever else, and it lands into a very difficult experience of relationships. So we got that triangle. Bam, 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 bam. You're familiar with the Kaplan triangle? It's another triangle. It goes like that. So it doesn't need to be dramatic to land into this problematic triangle. It is unfortunate. Things happen. Life can be unfair. Parents can be loving and unaware. They're willing to do the best thing and they create the worst. It happens. So we go into this concept of unfortunate password. In order to cover all that, I need to disclose that I have no financial relationship with any commercial interest related to the content of this activity. Speaking, not treating patients. Right, so let's start with the end of all this, addiction. We need to agree a little bit on one thing. Addiction is a very complex concept. It's not necessarily a behavioral problem. It is. It's much more than that. So addiction is more than the behavior we observe. So when we use the concept of behavioral health here in the US and to some extent in the UK, we all as clinicians know that beyond the behavior there's many things. Emotional processing, neurological problems, distorted thinking patterns or distorted cognitions in a lifespan behind. The problem is that by using this little word here, we propose a wrong message to the world, which is people coming, yeah, that's a really problematic behavior. Well, the behavior is at the end of the chain, right? So let's be careful here. There's more than a behavior when we talk about addiction. There is a life behind. There are struggles. There's emotional regulation problem. There's a way to think about ourselves. There's a way to connect. There's a lot of things we're just going to tap into quite briefly in order to land into parenting. As I said, addiction is reflected into the behavior of addiction. Addiction is not the behavior, and I'll come back to that. It's a syndrome, more than a primary disorder, but it becomes a primary disorder by a perpetuating cycle. I have been starting drinking when I was 14 years old. Very quickly, a bottle of vodka or whiskey a day. The base was not the drinking. I had the syndrome, and it became a primary disorder because I could not go through one day without having my bottle of vodka, and it lasted for 20 years probably. Now, the other thing we know is that addiction is rooted into complex developmental characteristics. We don't wake up one morning and say, okay, today I'm going to gulp a bottle of vodka. It's a process that is deeply rooted into developmental characteristics. So developmental psychology is absolutely indispensable to understand what's going on with addiction. It is, again, not just a behavioral problem located in the here and the now. It's on the longitude. Now, what we also know, parenting shapes largely the development on an individual or of an individual. And we'll come back to what means parenting, because parenting is not about mom and dad. Parenting is a process for a child to receive information and to develop on the basis of that information. It is an experiential process, and this is what we call parenting, and we'll come back to that. And therefore, the quality of that parenting determines the qualities of the coping strategies, the way we're going to cope with life. And sometimes it goes really south, and sometimes it goes really well. So, the question I want us to ask today is, how can we conceptualize the link between the process of parenting and the development of oneself, child going to teen to adulthood with addiction? What are the links? A short moment on implication in etiology and anamnesis, where this is coming from, and this is another problem. Can we really build a model about that? Well, I'm not sure, so I'll come back to that. Can we access the past? It's a big question, because all what I said is that when we see someone coming in our rooms, we're dealing with the present moment, but we also know we have to deal with the past. How do we access the past? Tell me your story? Well, that's quite subjective, and it's a good start, but it's biased. There's memory filters, there's a lot of things, so we cannot actually access the past. From a fundamental perspective, we are locked in 3 dimensions. The 4th dimension is not accessible to you and I. So we're going to have to take that into account if we go with the route of parenting leads to mental health issues and disorders, and we have to find a way to work the past in the present. How do we do that? It's not given. Now, what's the consequence in terms of treating people? And how much can we repair in adulthood what happened in the past? It's again the past conversation, but also how do we try to achieve what has not been achieved? How do we create a trend of what we call reparenting, which is basically self-actualization in trying to become our own parent at some point? And what are the tools we can use? Right. Just quickly, just to frame that, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. What is the opinion of the world around addiction? Google Check is a way to look at it. So a lot of hits. Okay, so it's a preoccupation. Now, if you look at that, it looks like a lot of people have different way to look at addiction. And sadly enough, behavior is the winner. Then we got weakness, illegal. I mean, this is not very helping, huh? And when it comes to more helping concept, it's dropping. And then people are not really aware that there's a little problem here. It kills. Now, how much does it kill? Probably have that here. Yeah. So these are controversial estimates, but very, very likely to be, sadly, accurate. They're coming from, I just had to put together different sources here. But what I like is this one. That's awful. And this is even more speaking, you know. Imagine every day in the news you have, 2 jumbo jets crashed, no survivors. This is the toll of addiction. Obviously, you're familiar with this very sad phenomena we have to deal with in your country. One word, it's not the case in the rest of the world. In Europe, we have a little surge at the moment. We don't know whether it's a trend that's going to follow the US like the crack epidemic did 15 years ago. It doesn't seem it's going that way. So when people go, how are you dealing with that in Europe? Actually, we don't really have the problem at the moment. We're very, very mindful and careful about it, so there's a lot of data being gathered. As a matter of comparison, the ratio is 4-to-1, no? So, you know, I think we could say that, unfortunately, addiction is one of the most prevalent diseases in mental health we have in the world. I don't know how you feel about that, but this justifies my day. This is the reason why I wake up in the morning and being mindful of that, helping one guy at a time. And it's tough because we're going against strong forces. Just bizarre, sorry for the bizarre thing here. Anyway, what is important to know is that it's a modern world phenomenon, but it's quite stable across time and space, global and human race. We have little changes. One change is what's happening with the opioids here with the surge in the US, but we had the UK 19th century where the alcohol became a big problem unaddressed, and it has something to do with the Industrial Revolution, where people were working very long hours and would numb themselves over the weekend on Friday night. Now guess what? The English have a very peculiar way to drink. They binge. They are bingers compared to the rest of Europe. Why do they binge? Well, they probably got that habit from the 19th century. They couldn't drink in the week. They were working 16 hours a day, so they had their Friday night, Saturday night. And it's still very resistant. I mean, people do binge. You have far more binges than chronic alcoholic daily drinkers in the UK. Now, the chemsex is another example. It's just raging unbelievably, and it's just spreading from a very community-based, the LGBT community, into non-LGBT communities. But that's something that's coming up at full speed at the moment. And then we got other moments in our civilizations globally in the world, and China and opium in the 19th century, thanks to the English. So out of that, contrasted findings. We have different methodology to scale all that. So again, it's very difficult to just land into this is it, this is how bad it is. Everyone is going with different things. You know, we've got sex addiction. So sex addiction, I got 3 different sources of data in the US, ranking from 3% to 12% of the population. Now, it depends on how you measure all that. So the quality of the measurement tools we have, lending to the evidence we need to develop practice, is also a very problematic thing. How do we measure things when it comes to addiction? Where does it start? We're on spectrum. DSM-5 just proposed something which is basically a spectrum. How many criteria do you meet? And again, it's not a black and white situation. Some people have peaks of complete dependence and addiction, and then it goes down, and then 10 years after it starts again. It's a very complex phenomenon. But speaking about the planet, this is the spread of alcohol drinking in liters, so 2.5 liters to the gallon of pure alcohol. So you can see that it's quite well spread. Again, depending how we look at that, that's a reasonable estimate figure. So that's 1/5 of the population in the world. That's more than the flu epidemic. That's more than the Hep C. That's more than anything we know. So is it an epidemic or is it a trait? Question that I don't have the answer to. How much part of that is an evolutionary process because we survive by using our environment. So when one day this guy with a wood stick bringing fire back to the cave, and we got the fire in the cave, and everybody's happy. We become fire dependent for our well-being, and if you suppress the fire, everyone's going to freak out. So we got used to that for a surviving mechanism. When it came to trying to do something with our mind and our brain, we're using substances. It's been like that for 10,000 years. First traces of alcohol, 10,000 years ago in East Africa, a form of beer. So, you know, we're on a spectrum. We have a human vulnerability. We all on the spectrum of using our external environment to medicate ourselves. So that's the first gate and entry to addiction. So I'm not surprised about that figure. It doesn't mean that everybody here in the 20% are just off the street, off the face, and just crawling under the influence of a substance, thank God. However, so yeah, this is what I just said. I mean, we're all using environment to feel better. Okay, so let's land quickly into the most comprehensive definition we have now, thanks to the ASAM. So you're familiar with the ASAM, the American Society for Addictive Medicine or Addiction Medicine. They are the one who worked out best a definition of addiction. Now, bear with me. The DSM-5 describes how is addiction. Now, this addresses what is addiction. Now, what's the difference between those two? Newton and Einstein. Newton, very wisely, said, how is gravity? Gravity is like that, right? Now, Einstein said, yeah, okay, but what is gravity? And he came with the space relativity, general relativity theory, and the distortion of space. Now, we are still in between the how. We know very well how addiction works. What it is, not that sure. Now, those guys, brilliantly, and I have so much respect for those 6 lines, have tried to do a very, very credible work. Now, however, I want to stop on that word, and I want to stop on those words. You're familiar with that, all of you, so I don't need to stop on that. But I want you to reflect on something. Chronic. So chronic suggests it happens again and again and again. And we're familiar with that concept in cancerology and in different other forms of pathology. Now, I cannot tell if the chronic is because we are missing the point and then we're not doing a job, or the chronicity is because it is true chronicity. I have been working with addicts for the last 10 years, and yes, things happen again and again and again. But is that chronic, or is that because we're missing the point? For my own story, I went 5 times to rehab. I worked truly, sincerely, what was on the table. And I relapsed different ways, complex mechanism, until I started to access my own life story, my childhood trauma, adverse childhood experience, and since then, things have been pretty well. So is it that my chronic relapsing process was just because the help I got was not the one I needed, or was it truly a chronic problem? I don't have the answer. I'm just, reflect for yourself. There's no answer to that question, but it's a bit humbling. Primary, I still believe that it is secondary and primary. It is secondary as a result of traumatic events and an attempt to cope with life, and it becomes primary because it's usually toxic, so it becomes a problem in itself. Now, so this definition is true and false, but it's all right. I think we have to sit with this ambivalence here. Now, the other thing here, reflected in an individual pathology pursuing reward by overusing substance. It reflects, it's not the problem. All this reflects into that. Now, if we sort out that, I'm not sure we're addressing that. And where this is coming from the formation of the personality, the formation of the self, the development of the brain, the neuroscience, and what has been given to us as a child, as a teen, from mom, dad, but many other people. So a very small event becomes a big memory, and we don't know exactly what plays out here. That's another way to look at it. Not far from here, there's Edward Kansian, who is a fantastic Harvard researcher. You probably know him. And he made another hypothesis. It's a very fair, addiction is a very fair attempt to try to regulate your emotions and your feelings. So we're going to be clever. An addict is very clever. Choose the drugs, the behaviors, whatever, in order to achieve a partially successful attempt to assuage painful feelings. That's another way to look at it. Then we got neuroscience. We talk about dopamine. We talk about a lot of things. And actually, for the last 5 years, a lot of what we are trying to achieve is neuroscience-driven. The research is neuroscience-based at the moment. It's important because we have to take that into account. Yeah, okay, genes, poor attachment, adverse childhood experiences, complex trauma, dysfunctioning dopaminergic circuitry. Okay, so that's the neuroscience approach. So in other words, we've got different angles here. None are wrong, none are right. Civilian world, opinion, medical world, symptomatic disease, neuroscience, abnormality of the brain. And that's the most important one. I want to pause on that, guys. From the addict world, painful life of bargain with fear, shame, and chaos, always dramatically experienced. And I would propose you to stay with that definition, because that's the one we have in our rooms. That's the one we're truly dealing with. There's so many things just in those 2 lines. And this is what we have this is where we have to reach the client. This is where we have to walk with the client in very painful, uncharted territories. Okay, so I'm just going to pass on that one because it's just an elaboration of all what I said. Yeah, just one word. You familiar with the MATCH project? So some 25 years ago, we wanted to know whether motivational interviewing, CBT, and 12-step self-facilitation will work better with 1,500 cohort alcoholic. The three modalities came in a nutshell between 27 and 32% of rate of success. And so we concluded, well, it doesn't make a real difference. And actually, it's probably the Carl Rogers approach, the bonding with the client, the patient, that is going to make the difference. Now, that's not my problem here. My problem is 30% of success. That's really sad. That's the problem. Can I live as a therapist knowing that I'm going to nail it 30% of the cases? That's awfully sad, depressing. So why is that? Is it that we don't understand the problem well? Is it that we don't deliver, we're just going cognitive, we should be, there's many things that we reflect on at the moment. But for me, MASH project had one single finding. We are failing, 30% is not good enough. And then we call it chronic. But maybe it's not chronic, it's just because we're not doing a good job. Sorry to be a bit harder here, but I want to shake you. Let's think another way. So, that's my favorite photo. I'm a great fan of astrophysics. You know what's that? It's a black hole. Now, what is interesting here is not that the black hole, I don't know whether you know what's a black hole. There's this kind of gravitational hole where everything is pulled inside. The interesting point here is not at all that everything is gulped by the black hole. The interesting thing is this black thing. We cannot see a thing. Why? Because the light is kept by the gravity pull, so we don't see. And what we know is that there's a lot of light behind this black curtain. There's a lot of things happening. And the problem we have is not dissimilar. What is addiction? Bit of a black hole. What we see and know is all what's around. And we make a lot of inferential evidence. Their direct evidence are difficult to capture. Judith Lando here has a great and very rigorous evidence-based work, which is brilliant. But we also have a tendency to take evidence for granted. It has to be scrutinized because what we see on the outskirts here is an inferential evidence of what's going on here. Who knows what's going into the brain of a patient we have in front of us? I'm not his brain. I don't know. I know what he tells me. What he tells me is on the outskirts. So I like this analogy with the black hole, just for that reason. Can't see a thing, therefore it's a behavioral health problem. Well, can't see a thing, let's try to see. Let's try to scrutinize. Let's try to unveil the black curtain instead of concluding too quickly. That's another one I love. There's hope there, right? Because all what I showed is very chaotic. In all chaos, there's a cosmos. In all disorder, there's a secret order. And I think what we're trying to unveil, going back into parenting and what happened, is to try to understand the order. Order doesn't mean healthy order any second. There's a huge order and logic in people with mental health, but it's there. It's not a standard norm. So if you take the bell curve of standard behavior, they're on the extreme. But for them, they're in the middle of what they want to do. It's maybe unproductive, damaging, consequence, whatever, but there is an order, which is not necessarily the order, as we say, and we have a tendency, I think, to apply norms to our patients. Eventually, it's a good thing, probably, but as a starting point, what is the order of this man, this woman in front of me is a good question. Now, last thing about addiction here, normal people use for fun, addicts use to feel able to cope with life. And that's the central point, but I believe you are all familiar with that. Now, the problem here is that if you combine all that and the difficulty of life, is that an addict is following a non-deterministic pattern of behavior. So therefore, whenever we come with logic, CBT, ABC, we're applying a logic which is a deterministic model to a non-deterministic pattern. So it collapsed, it doesn't work. People are chaotic. So there's butterfly effect all the time. What made a relapse possible? Maybe just a siren of police patrol coming. Maybe my mother, maybe whatever. This is butterfly effect. If you're familiar with butterfly effect, the butterfly effect in Indonesia created a hurricane in the Caribbean, right? So it's coming from the weather chaos model. And chaos is not a bad word. Chaos is a scientific way to describe a non-predictable situation. So this is central here. When you have normal people, they decide to have fun and they decide to engage into behavior. When it comes to addiction, there's so many butterfly effect that we're walking in non-deterministic patterns. Implication, when an addict stops using, he feels inadequate or unable to cope with life. I think we all know that. Second implication, an addict is not addicted to something. Now we're coming to an interesting point. There's many ways to practice addiction. The object of addiction, opiates, is not addiction, is what we take to fulfill the addiction. So is coke, so is alcohol, so is sex. You've got many ways. Obviously, substances. We've got what we call the social dopamine. Work, workaholic, shopping, spending, gambling, relationships, social network. Excessive or actually abstinence as anorexia. I'm going to stop on that one. The central in parenting plays a role there, primary role. I call them prehistoric dopamine because they really pertain to basic things in life. Sex, reproduction, basic instinct here. It's not social sex, and it's profound biological sex that underpins any sexual behavior. Food, guess what? If we don't eat, something wrong is going to happen, right? And it's not new. It's been like that for 2.5 billion years, when the eukaryote bacteria is starting to gulp the others. Prokaryote, sorry. And then the bonding, because to survive, we became, 2 million years ago, hugely social. So these are the ones that are always behind anything there. So an addict has his own addiction map. So just very quickly, just never forget that. 63.5% presented over 5 addictions. So I did a research on that, but the most famous one is Bargain with Chaos from Patrick Carnes, 2006, where he evidenced that 84% of his cohort, about 1,700 people, were having more than 3 addictions at the same time. So he started with sex addiction because it's his world, but it landed into the concept of multiple addiction. So again, you know, when we work with someone presenting an addiction, we have to look at that mapping. And that mapping is an early map. It starts very early in life. And then, therefore, addiction is not dependence. Addictive disorders imply dependence. But the hypothesis we have now, more and more, is that addictive disorder, forget about the DSM-5, the addictive disorder is a multifactorial mental disease. Addiction is the behavior resulting from that, and dependence is a state. So what are we dealing with? What are we treating here? Are we treating that? Okay, that's detox, that's stabilization, and the dependence carries on even though the behavior has stopped. Addiction as a preoccupied primary behavior, all right. But when is it that we just try to understand that bit? And we have to go up in our treatment plan and continuum of care. Otherwise, it becomes a chronic disease. Okay, no one is born addict. We got predisposition, we got genetics research reporting that. But what we have best at the moment is the neoteny hypothesis. The child is born neotenous. Are you familiar with the concept of neotenous? Completely unfinished. The pregnancy should last twice the length of 9 months, biologically speaking. The reason why we deliver quickly is because of the hip and the canal, because we are walking, the hip narrowed, and we need to just to deliver. One reason. Inferential evidence suggests also that because we are so hugely social, we cannot build a fully ready little baby in the womb and get it ready for life. We need to spare time where the brain is still plastic to create the social development, because otherwise we'll never achieve the social bonding that we needed for 2 million years to survive. So there's an evolutionary domain here, a necessity that the child is unfinished, landing into a responsibility to finish the job that biology does not finish. How do we finish the job? The concept of parenting now appears, because the child is absolutely unfinished. And another important point, and I'm just preparing your talk, Judith, here, which is hugely transmittable from generation to generation. Things are carrying on and carrying on. And I leave that to you, Judith, this afternoon, obviously. You are the expert here. A few quotes to reinforce that. Childhood adversity that creates the susceptibility for addiction. Gabor Maté. Child abuse and neglect is the single most common cause of drug and alcohol abuse. Bessel van der Kolk. adverse childhood experience leads to 4,800 times more chances to develop addiction. That's Felitti, who is the one who researched most out of the ACE experience, the CDC work that happened 20 years ago, and he produced about 20 papers about addiction and adverse childhood experience. So, we're not the only one thinking that way, right? And they spend their life conceptualizing, analyzing, reviewing, evidencing all what's going on here. That's an interesting thing. Sorry for those slides. I don't know what's happening. The missing link, childhood trauma or adverse childhood experience to addiction. Let's get into that now. Right. We use trauma in America. We don't use trauma in the rest of the world as a word to describe something adverse that happened as a child. If you go with trauma in the rest of the world, people will think earthquake, bombshells, severe sexual abuse, or severe physical abuse. Now, here, given the work that's been done in the 80s from Bessel, from Pierre Melody, and others, and Judith, we have another understanding. So I'm going to use trauma here, but also adverse childhood experience, standing for ACA, because with clients, this works a bit better, because if you go, yeah, you got childhood trauma, the guy goes, doesn't work. Adverse childhood experience is gentle. Let's try to understand the unfortunate quality of what was adverse. So it's a great, powerful name working with our clients. It's more invitational, because trauma can be shaming, especially if there's a hidden secret somewhere that the patient has never spoken about. Okay, the profound impact on the neurodevelopmental of the brain, I think you're all familiar with that, but it's very important to the systems are damaged in order to survive. That's a very interesting concept. The damage is a coping strategy. We are damaged because something happened. Oh, very sad. But actually, the damage needed to happen to expand into a surviving mechanism. So it's a very complex paradox to accept. Damage is needed. It's because the brain is damaged and then the coping mechanism becomes out of the norm and is successful into surviving an adverse dynamic that the child is exposed. And it happens when the brain develops. So it becomes a very structured damage. There's two ways, we'll maybe go into details here to capture, conceptualize what happened when there's an exposure to trauma in childhood, hyperarousal, dissociation. That's the two responses to stress. And hyperarousal includes the fight and the fly. You fight, hyperarousal, fly, you run, which is another way to fight, by the way, because it takes energy as well. It's very similar. Or you dissociate, which is the opposite strategy, which is you pretend you're dead. The problem we have here is that when all this happens, neural connections are created. And it's a matter of time, the state of stresses, whatever the fabric of the stress is, becomes a state of affect and emotional dysregulation, which will be sooner or later mediated by addiction and other ways, but we're talking about addiction here. So when the state becomes the trait, so in our way to address that, we have to identify the states before we try to check whether there's been a trait, because resilience do exist. It's not because something sad and bad happened that we're going to have that. It's, again, non-deterministic models. We don't know. So, just to summarize a little bit, that's from Patrick Cairns, actually. He just proposed a very interesting thing, the VIA, vulnerability initiation addiction dynamic, to show how it grows. So the vulnerability starts very early. We got a child, he's grown up in an addiction-prone culture, addictogenic society is what we, how we describe it nowadays. There might be genetic predisposition, epigenetic as well, and leading to a neurochemical vulnerability. This is a big chunk. This is a big chunk, and because we are merely exposed to our families, usually the abuse happens into the family, or the family cannot see the abuse happening outside the family. And this is also related to the family. What are the highs we can access to when we're 4 or 5 years old? What's the main way to just have a boost from this place of desperation within because nothing's working for life? We're 4 or 5 years old, there's only one thing. very accessible in our fridge, sugar. And sugar results from unsupervised parenting. The second one we have here to get a high, as Freud intuited it, is masturbation. Sugar and masturbation are the primary ways to get a high when you're a kid. Now, how does this happen? Lack of supervision, lack of thoughtfulness, lack of attention, whatever, from the grown-up. Or they don't know. Well, they should know better, probably. So we've got that. And then we grow up. So that's the same one bigger, so for you to see it. The slides will be available, so don't worry too much. So then we got into the initiation, which is the second stage. We adapt, we start to gain autonomy. However, early difficult adverse family experience lead to shame-based, self-esteem problem. Abuse experience leads to proper PTSD. Highs to feel better leads to a way to cope with systematic stress. This is when the state becomes the trait, and we medicate that with a high. It grows up here as well with innovation, you know, from food, sugar, masturbation. This child will find that it is interesting to grab into daddy's bottle of whiskey. Neurochemical change are quite stable, leading from that. And obviously, from an addiction-prone culture, the peer influence is going to be massive. And then we land into that, which is compulsion, whatever it means, substance abuse, rage, outburst, bizarre behavior that are really compulsive, OCD, compulsive masturbation, compulsive overeating, compulsive drinking, compulsive drugging. Now, why? Because addiction regulates the emotional life, so we just find an answer to that. And it also answers that. And then the shame is the fuel here. The shame goes up and aggravates everything because we feel less than, we feel not connected, we feel rejected, we feel abandoned because of this that happened. This carries on. And, you know, when this is overwhelming, we go into isolation. So I think, you know, we have here exactly what we see in a clinical room. But beyond or behind that column here, we've got all that. Now, interestingly, if we want to do a thorough job here, we've got a problem. Because if we want to link all that together, we have factorial 18 possibilities. This is 6.4 quadrillion. So 6.4 times 10 to the power 15. It's impossible. It's more stars than in the whole universe. And you know, we only have 100 billion stars in a galaxy. So if you just want to combine all that and review all the hypotheses, you're going to have to go that. It's impossible. Now, what we have thought of recently is that we have to go, because this is impossible, with the greatest common denominator. What is common here and sometimes here? The way we grow up, the way we self-develop, the way we acquire skills, the way we have received parenting. And I'm going to talk about that very interesting concept, which is not how parenting is delivered, but how it is received and perceived and digested and processed, leading to a self-actualization, the wrong way or the right way. So just a word about that, but I think, Judith, you'll stop on that one. But what are the nature of damage when there is childhood adverse experience? Obviously affect dysregulation, incapacity to deal constructively with feelings, low self-esteem, worthless, hopeless. That's no good news when you have the three of them. It's a matter of time you're going to have suicidal thoughts. Hyperarousal, constant, you're going to talk about that, but ADHD, ADD, bipolar-like or bipolar truly. Rage, control, rebellion, hypersexualization, narcissism, hero roles, all that kind of response. And the other way is to withdraw, to escape, to numb, to experience a complete distress, depression, victimization. I would say we've got the psychostimulant here, substance abuse. We got here, obviously, the numbers and the opioids, and alcohol is in between, cannabis is in between, sex is definitely here. Food is both. You know, we've got different ways to use all that. So, the brain is developed as a child. The experience is adverse. The brain is shaped through traumatic experience instead of being shaped through healthy, nurturing experience. Pierre Melody has a definition of child abuse. She says everything less than nurturing. Now, I don't know whether you have children, but with that definition, I'm an absolutely abusive father. Huh? There's no doubt. It's a very, very high expectation definition. But the reality is that, yeah, the brain is shaped, the brain develops, and if the experience is adverse, the shape is going to go in a very interesting way. The other important thing is that child is programmed to trust and to be attached to the major caregivers. Why is that? Conditioned to surviving. The first thing that the newborn baby smells is the mother's breast and the smell of the milk. And why that? Because the olfactory bulb is directly connected to the limbic system. It's the only sense around the five sense that is not going through the cortex system. It's going straight to the limbic. Why? Because the little baby needs to eat immediately. It's a surviving mechanism. So there's an attachment, there's a DNA factor, and it's reinforced socially, obviously, with the mere exposure. So there's an expectation from the child. So the child's going to believe whatever is given to him. The central problem in parenting is that the receiving end of the parenting, the child, is absorbing like a sponge whatever the message are. So you're not good enough, my son, is seen as a true statement. Because we are programmed to believe. Because we need to believe to survive. It's been like that for 2 million years, probably 3. And the last little problem here is that even when there is a sense of all this is not working for me, there's no way out, it's a jail. The child has no permission to leave the family. There's been one experience in Sweden. You could divorce your parents. Didn't really work. They tried that for 5 years. It's an interesting experiment. Huh? So damages are written in stone. At the time, the brain is hugely plastic. And this is different from adult PTSD. We went into childhood trauma, developmental trauma from the Vietnam War, actually, leading to PTSD, and went, oh, that's interesting. People haven't been to Vietnam and displaying the same symptoms. But actually, unless the GI has been sent very young, before 20, 21 years old, this is adult PTSD. And it's a completely different story. Okay, another thing, just to illustrate that very quickly. Okay, you're familiar with that figure? 100 billion neurons? So by the way, it's more than genes. Huh? So we have, if we go with nature nurtures thing, the numbers of genes is lower than the numbers of neurons. Now, that's the most important bit that we discovered not long ago. So that's a microscopic photo of neurons at birth. So you see there's a little density, there's room for expansion, and there's a little connection. Now, 7 years down the road, wow, it's hugely connected. Because we are learning machines. Because we are totally unachieved when we're born. So we are genetically programmed to learn. And we learn so much that we don't filter the learning. We believe in the learning. So we form a lot of neural connections. And interestingly, once we start to understand and adapt, we start to select. This is called the pruning phase. So between 7 years old and 15 years old, we will keep probably 40% of that. This is when, I'm going to speak for myself here, my neural connection was not really great at that moment. I was very sad. I was not belonging to my family. I had an alcoholic father, a lot of verbal violence in the family. Life sucked, I may say. Now, here, I was there, and here I kept one good thing. A bottle of whiskey was sorted out, and an evening masturbation was sorted out. These were my prunings, or what I kept. Then I kept that probably someone else could make it better, so I started obsessing about girls. I just had to deal with a little bit of sexual identity at some point, but most of the time I started obsessing here. And then I discovered, as a late onset here, that I needed psychostimulant because I also have undiagnosed ADHD. Given the hypervigilance I had to display, it's not a surprise. So that's interesting because what we try to capture is the faulty things here and the wrongly selected things here when we do our job in terms of our trauma to addiction processes. Okay, we have, oh, there's a mistake there. So we got 7 main axes of damages. We got the proper trauma reaction. Someone is triggered and have an outburst and an out-of-control reaction. That should read reenactment. I'm sorry, I apologize. which is basically we go back to what we're familiar with. So that's a very important thing, that we are attracted to what we know. So we tend to form again and again relationship and patterns of behaviors and thinking that parallel what happened in early life, because we learn in early life. So we keep that learning active, so we go back to what we know, which is not a pathology, it's an absolute human process. Now, we name it a pathology because we want just to treat those people. It's a good way to do it, but there is nothing fundamentally wrong into trying to use what we learned. We do that all the day. Now, with what we learned was seriously skewed and biased, we're going to use something wrong, and it's going to lead to problematic things. Trauma bond is a mild form of Stockholm Syndrome. Are you all familiar with Stockholm Syndrome when we bond with the abuser? It's out of a bank robbery in Stockholm. So again, you know, if we have been attached with people who were not looking after us or being very abusive, we're going to just fall in love again with those guys. That's the most important thing when the self-esteem is baffled, not constructed by the family, the parenting process. We feel worthless, we have identity crisis, we feel not good enough, not connected. We call that shame in the US. In the rest of the world, it's more problematic because, you know, if you take Japanese, there's 11 possible translations for shame. Arabic, there's 13, 5 in French, 7 in Italian. So thank God in English we just have one word. It's very, very, very handy. But if you're working with non-native language, but speaking English, actually, you want to clear that out, by the way. What is the meaning of shame for you? Because you'd be surprised, especially if you work with Latin origin people, Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, or Latin American. They have another understanding of that we have, us, Anglo-Saxon. Trauma blocking is just a denial. It's strong, sometimes. This is a surviving mechanism. Oh, nothing has happened, I'm strong, I'm getting on with it, and it backfires, obviously. Splitting is the dissociation, whether it's natural, it's a brain process, whether it's induced by a substance. And that's the sad one, the trauma abstinence, self-hatred, punishment. You know, I need to carry on killing myself because those parents did a good job at trying to make me feel that I deserve to be dead. So anorexia is there, big time, big time. I punish myself. And then also I use it to control the environment with different process, but there's the I hate myself usually reflects here. So again, this is what happens and what we observe when we work with our client, and it comes from different ways of parenting. A word about how do we know that? What's the evidence of all the crap I've just said? Where's this coming from? We're lucky, because that seldom happens. And I really pay my respect to these guys at the CDC and the Kaiser Permanente in South California. You know, can you imagine working with that? It's fantastic. So what they did is to backtrack and give some questionnaires and try to understand how much the childhood experience was adverse. There's actually it's not 0 to 10, it's 10 questions, and it's a yes-no questionnaire, but the scale, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, parent with mental disease and addiction, parents in jail, different things. I don't want to get into detail. You just find that online. You just Google adverse childhood experience to get everything. Now, what happened here is interesting. That's the average score of a human being in Southern California in the neighborhood of San Diego. May not be the same thing here, neither in France or the UK, but this is what they found as an average score. Now, this is a significant cohort, all social classes, gender, and ethnicity combined, with maybe a bit of a prevalence of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, but they adjusted all that. So this is the stat. Now, the other stat here is if you have a score over 6 out of 10, this is what Felitti researched and evidenced. Because obviously the research didn't stop with childhood, they looked at what happened in adulthood. So they have a whole file for 17,000 adults. That's the first evidence we really had about how, you know, the greater this number is, the more you have chances to develop alcoholism and drug addiction. And drug addiction means illegal substance in Felitti's work. So that's me. I did a bit of UK research because this has never been researched in the UK. So I just took residential patient in substance misuse treatment, 68. Again, the score of the ACE standards. And what I found was that the average was 6.8, so not dissimilar to Fility. And 79% had a score higher than 4, and 30%, one-third, had a score higher than 6. So it means the greater, the greater the score, the more chance you have to find yourself into rehab, right? And the other interesting thing is that they all came in with, I got an alcohol problem, I got a substance misuse problem, but when we mapped it, this is the reality. So you combine that and this, you've got a lot of work to do. It's just not about behavioral cessation. Because if you stop one behavior, which is, just alcohol or heroin behavior, you're going to have another 4 addiction popping up. And it's popping up on a very, very polluted soil. A strong adverse childhood experience. What do we have here? Yeah, the only thing interesting is that emotional abuse is high in the correlation. Emotional neglect is high. It's not a surprise. The most interesting thing is the domestic violence is also a high contributor to developing addiction. What does this mean? I'm a child. Actually, it's my experience. It's my life. I'm a child. And mom and dad were having endless overnight arguments, shouting and fighting, not physical, verbal most of the time. And I've been exposed all the time to that stressor. 3 conclusions for the child I remember vividly. First of all, they're going to split and I'm going to be left on my own. Second, daddy is going to kill mommy, so I will starve from emotional support and eventually maybe food because she is giving me food. And the third thing is that, all right, so daddy's aggressive right now. It may fall onto me. So I have 3 layers of stress here experienced on a daily, several times a week basis, from as far as I can remember until as far as I could leave home. So that's probably 12 years, 13 years of permanent exposure. So I definitely identify to that category. And in my work, I also tend to check, because this is kind of obvious to capture. This is more subtle. How was it to see mom and dad having this argument? The divorce is part of that. And most of the time, it's the memory around the verbal shouting, the passive aggressiveness, and all that is still very remnant in adulthood. Okay, so the usual correlation with sexual abuse, early sexual abuse, eating disorder, domestic violence, and alcohol, and psychostimulant drugs, emotional abuse, and neglect leading to alcohol and psychodepressant drugs. And high ACE total score lands immediately into relationship problems, immediately. The lowest correlation, interestingly, is physical abuse. Now, we have another study from Fility saying physical abuse as a child leads to physical reaction. What's experienced in the body is manifested in the body. So we have chronic back pain, we have chronic migraines, we have somatic traces of the physical abuse more than, I'm not saying it's black and white, more than addiction and substance misuse. So here we are now. Okay, addiction is just one component of childhood adverse experience, which should be here, adult attachment, and addiction. So the past is about childhood, and the present is about addiction and attachment. And this is almost in 90% of the case I have been dealing with in the last 10 years. And if you focus on that and forget about that and that, it's going to start again. If you focus on that without checking that, it's going to start again. If you deal with what's going on right now in your life, it's going to be very helpful if there's a crisis, but this is going to erupt as a sleeping volcano at some point. So we have to work with that triangle. All right, so this is a summary. I'm not going to go through it again. I'm repeating myself. Okay. Now, what is parenting? We intuitively go with mom and dad. It's not what I mean here. Parenting is all what converges and concurs for the individual to self-develop. And it has a neurological implication, a neural connection, it has a social implication, and it has an internal implication. We have a problem as human beings. We work with the contradiction of working out our internal models and trying to work external models. It's like just having one cogwheel like that and the other one like that. It's quite difficult. And reining the two together is hard work, and this is what we learn to do around a nucleus family and then gradually around peer-to-peer contact. So parenting is much more than mom and dad. Now, mom and dad are central. They are primary caregivers, and they can be biological fathers or mothers or social, as in adoption. But you've got so many significant others. We never know, sorry. We never know, what's the extended family? And Judith is going to tap into that. The peer-to-peer influence happened very quickly. We don't even know it at kindergarten. There's something happening. Neighbors and mentors. Now, the thing is that, how do we try to understand that? The mom, dad, we get it, right? But, neighbors and mentors, what remains in the souvenir and memory of our clients is probably a good indication. Let me give you an example. I was 12 years old. I was already quite depressed and disengaged with low self-esteem, but trying to keep myself at school with reasonable school reports to please my parents and trying to cope, pruning. There's this neighbor who comes to home. The guy, I probably saw him 5 times in my life. Anyway, he's coming to sort out a neighborhood problem, and he's some sort of industrialist in France. Anyway, quite big man. And I'm this 12 years old boy. And for some reason, I'm left with the guy for 5 minutes. And the guy says, "How's it going at school, Christophe?" And I said, "Well, it's not that easy. I'm struggling. I'm trying my best." I'm answering. And the guy says, "Oh, you have to work at school, because if you work at school, you can hold the world in your hand, and you will win this battle." Oh, okay. Right. I got that, and that's literally 10 seconds, right? I think I didn't trust my parents enough to ask for feedback and what's the meaning of all that. I just took that on board and said, okay, now this is the order. Right, this is the tall order because I struggle just to keep my, B, A, C. It's just so the stressor came. Now, I'm here with you. I'm 56 years old, so we're speaking nearly, well, not half a century, but 40 years later, right? How is it that I remember, not only cognitively, but because I'm talking to you guys, but whilst talking, I see the scenery, I see the face of the guy, I see myself, I see this huge sofa we had, the red one, and I'm in Paris, and it's there. So this little intervention, the guy meant well, here, had a profound impact on the poor choices I made in life. For different reasons, but this was a reason. I had to prove myself, so I went into this business school, MBA, business life. Dr. Brett, you just mentioned my previous banker's life, and it has something to do with that little moment. Now, this is not about mom and dad. Huh? Mom and dad has another stake into that, but that's, life is full of those things. So when we look at parenting, please, let's get out from mom and dad. It's one thing. But we also have to screen the other one. The cousins, my God, so many stories about the 2 years older cousin who told me that and that and that. And I'm not going to be specific here because you can imagine probably. Just think about it yourself. Did you have a 2 years older cousin who's been a mentor? And not necessarily in the right way. I think we all have cousins, right? Yeah, I played the doctor with one of mine, right? I don't know whether you're familiar with what it means playing the doctor when you're 11 years old, right? Injection in the butt. Right. I think we're all clinicians here, so I can just go a little bit neutral and wild, right? Okay, so what's happening there when all this happened? Perception system is enhanced, and it's non-cognitive process, which questioned the CBT approach, by the way. What I mean here is that we overperceive things, hypervigilance, hyperreaction to threat, misunderstanding, misreading the outer world and perceiving a threat when there's no threat. The main example is the exhaust pipe banging, and there's this poor guy who's back from a tour in Afghanistan and he thinks he's back into the bomb shelf and he runs away. But we also have that. with child, and my mother was always pointing a finger at me and saying, you really need to do your homework. She didn't mean wrong. I mean, that was the right thing to do. I was such a lazy boy. So again, misfortunate, because I didn't like that, but I couldn't rage at her. I was angry with myself. Sometimes I would destroy my bedroom. Another ADHD symptom. And the other day, my beloved one, who was about the size of my mother, gray hair, very similar, she came to me and said, you really need to do that now. Oh. Now, I had a proper rage attack at my partner vicariously because I was angry. God bless her, she's long dead, my mother. And my mother didn't mean to harm me, to hurt me. She was believing she was doing her best. But misfortunate, this was not very helpful. We're in the 60s, people have other mindset, right? So my perception to the fingers, please don't point a finger at me. I would like to finish that talk peacefully, right? Or just ask me to turn my back. So perception system enhanced. Ability to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant. That's the central thing. And when we work with people who have been misparented, they lack of wisdom. Because no one really told them. Everything is learned. So what is relevant or irrelevant? Actually, the finger from my partner was irrelevant. What was relevant was the excessive behavior from my mother. So that's a place where I'd like to tell you a very simple story. Imagine we're 5 years old. We're in India, rainforest, little village. Life is quite cool. We're just forbidden to do one thing, going into the rainforest. We don't really know why, and we're very tempted because we are curious creatures. We're human beings. Human beings are by essence curious. So one day we just sneak out and we get into the forest. The forest is beautiful, shadows, a bit scary, a bit fascinating, tweets and all that. And all of a sudden you can imagine the old Mowgli story. There's a big tiger coming. Wow. We've got a bit of fly system in place, so we climb up the tree. And the tiger goes off. And we're just very, very scared. We got heartbeat, the adrenaline is pumping. We're alive. And then one of us says, yeah, we have to go back to the village, right? Yeah, let's do that. Oh, we got a problem. We were not allowed to do that, so we're going to have to find a strategy just to come back. Okay, easy. We're going to lie. We're never going to talk about that. We're going to pretend it never existed. Yeah, that's the good thing to do. So we're just going back to the village. Going back to the village, the grown-ups say, hey guys, where have you been? We've been fishing. And funny, you don't have any fish. No one noticed that we look a little bit palish maybe. Well, we managed and we go, yay, that was really good. 20 years down the road, we're 25 years old, still best friend. And we want to discuss girlfriends, so we have the stroll in the bush nearby the village. And we're talking very, very preoccupied with those girlfriends. This is a central topic, and we don't notice there is a zebra coming. And all of a sudden, our limbic system noticed zebra, and we find ourselves up the baobab tree again. 25 years old, we're going, what happened here? This is a zebra. I mean, you don't want to go too close to the zebra, but okay, guys. The zebra is stripy. The tiger is stripy. And in between, nothing happened to process what happened. Therefore, we got a bit of a problem here. We don't have the wisdom to know the difference. I don't know whether you're familiar with the 12-step program, but this is the third stance of the Serenity Prayer. And that's the most important stance for someone who had very strong adverse childhood experience. The wisdom to know the difference is so important. And it has never happened in upbringing, so we really need to learn about that. There's one thing, this is the nature of abuse, and it's coming from Pierre Malody, and I have adapted it actually. There's one thing I just want to stop on, because we know about abandonment, neglect, and we know about the sexual abuse, there's one important thing that is sometimes completely missed. It's the false empowering parenting. So what is this? You're so beautiful today, my little princess. Daddy loves you dearly. You're the most cutest girl in the world, and you were so brilliant on the stage at this performance today. What do you think is the message I'm sending my daughter right now? I love her, it's on the verge of incest, it's not adequate, it's not appropriate, and it gives her a sense of empowerment that leaves no room for failure. Now, failing is the fuel of learning. Now, I'm blocking that capacity to learn. She's going to develop probably a very perfectionist one-er personality if I'd carry on doing that. Oh, you my little man, says mom or grandmam or auntie to this handsome little boy. It's not going to help. He's just a boy. He's not a man. Come on. So we falsely empower, my son is best at school. Okay, yeah, right. And you can be proud of that. But what sort of message are we giving? You're going to still be my son if you stay best at school. My son is the best at school. Look at the language. My son is best at school. Let's reverse. If you're not best at school, what's happening? You're no longer my son. Aha. Fear of abandonment is just underneath. So this is a difficult way to grow up, a difficult state to grow up in. Now, there's a very important one here, which is the reverse parenting role. Have you ever heard someone saying, if I had a child, my life would be better? If we had a child, our marriage will not go south in getting to that divorce. Aha. So what's the role of the child here? Even in the project of conceiving the child is going to have to fix all that. Do you think an 18 months old little baby is able to fix an adult-to-adult dysfunctioning relationship? Do you think that a boy or a girl is capable to look after, mommy, I'll feel so much better if I had a child, so I won't feel sad, I'll feel joy and happiness. No. Children is no joy and happiness all the time at all. It's hard work, actually. I've had 3. It's so obvious. There's something wrong here. So this is giving a false role and false power. So that's the only thing I want to stop here, because the rest is kind of understood and kind of obvious. But that's the one we overlook at it sometimes. So a quick word around this one. You can look at it on the slide. So that's the Pierre-Melody model. Now, there's a lot of models in terms of developmental blocks and immaturity. This one is simple. I'm not saying it's necessarily the one at all, but it gives a matrix where you can use validly all that to just map a little bit what's going on with your clients. So the assumption, which is just an assumption, is that a child is born valuable, vulnerable, imperfect, dependent, and spontaneous. This is kind of obvious. Some people disagree on that, but it's a valid assumption to work with. Spontaneity is central here. If you repress the spontaneity of a child, as in, don't make noise, daddy is tired now, you're blocking that, but that's the fuel to learning. If you're not spontaneous, you're not going to learn. If you don't allow your child to go there and explore what's going on there, he's never going to learn what is there. I see patients, they've been kept in their little push cart for 4 or 5 years because they were walking too slowly. Well, they still struggle to walk 40 years down the road. So spontaneity is central here. So all this, if it's not nurtured properly through the parenting process involving mom, dad, family, extended family, or regulated when something goes wrong, a lack of affirmation of the value of the being leads to self-esteem issues and leads to reactive control other people, or being very submissive. And then relationship is screwed. Vulnerability is about protecting the child and showing how to protect himself. So if you don't have that in place and served by the parenting system, you're going to develop a boundary issue. How do I say no? How do I protect myself? Or how do I allow people to come in and give me feedback? And why do we have anger at the end here? Because when we're too much exposed to others' energy, we cannot contain it. We're going to be angry with the experience, angry at ourselves, or angry at other people as an ultimate boundary. If I struggle to say no, and it comes too close to the bone, I'm going to start to be aggressive. So we got those markers like that. The imperfection is so important. When, oh, you're my best little hero man, is contrary to imperfection. It creates a sense of good and perfectionism. Or you're always late. It's a matter of time you're going to feel bad about yourself because your parents, extended parents, are just naming you as always late. It's a matter of time you're going to believe that you are always late. You are that identity. As a matter of time, you're going to develop a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is basically, if they're telling me I'm always late, I'm going to be always late to be myself. And that's the way it lands into personality development. Obviously, we've got addiction here, leading to you know, an over-dependency to the outer world. Now, the reality is that all this goes like that. So when I'm working with that, looking at the trauma, this is not met. Leading into immaturity, this is not working. Leading into unmanageability, this is what's happening. And then I'm basically not connecting with other people. I work here. I take the history here, what happened, but I work here and I try to understand what are the links here. Just connecting those things, because actually it doesn't go like that. It doesn't go necessarily tit for tat. Just have, usually there's always two core issues firing off at the same time. Have low self-esteem, I'm going to build walls instead of boundaries. So don't come that close to me because I feel like shit. And then I'm going to have anger at myself, anger at other people, and I'm going to try to control the environment. So this comes as a little square here. It goes like that. But it's a very interesting matrix. It has something to do with Darwin, with Erikson, with transactional analysis, with developmental psychology. So it's hugely integrative, it's very simple. And guess what? Clients are very responsive to it. Show it to clients, and they go, oh yeah, well actually, yes, I have a problem of self-esteem. I don't want anyone to step onto my self-esteem, so I'm building walls. Yeah, and then I'm angry. Yeah, okay, I can see. And it's a very good inducer to just get them to understand what's going on. What is important also is to try to decipher for a given parent, not mom and dad, whatever qualifies as a parent, to try to understand what's dynamic. And they are case by case, because this, you know, my role as mommy was there, daddy was like that, I've never been like that. However, I had a nanny who looked at me really in the first couple of years of my life. So I had a bit of that, but it changed. It changed. And then all of a sudden, when I was 35 years old, needing rehabs and all that, I had a mommy coming there. But because I had that before, I didn't really trust that. So it varies over time. But these are the three possibilities. And this includes, by the way, someone, as an adult, abusing substance. Because you don't need to run away to be away. I could never connect to my father. He was too much connected to this bottle of whiskey he had every night. That's very simple. So that's something important. It's actually more awful to have a parent present in the room and absent in the mind and in the emotional process. Disconnected emotionally but physically present. That's impossible to compute for a child. The brain cannot. What's happening here? I'm the son, I expect to be loved, and I have someone reading the newspaper when I want to show my last drawing at school. Not now. Daddy's reading. How do you want a child to compute that? It's a matter of time, the self-esteem is going to go down. There's something wrong with me. And then comes the negative self-belief and the coping mechanism, which is I need to do something about that. I isolate, I read, I binge on food, I try to reach out to mommy, but mommy is busy cooking, there's no one, unfortunate again, and so on and so forth. And it's a matter of time, I try to find my place in the family. So again, these are very simplistic roles. They are just milestones. There's three possibilities. I'm pleasing, I'm the hero, I'm trying to be seen for my achievement. I'm a lost child and I'm trying to get as much love as I can from manipulation. I feel low, but I am trying to display perfect behaviors, perfect portraits, and I'm trying to pretend that to myself. So it's an internal monologue, but I am on the top of the world. Lost child are going with, they don't need boundaries because they need just to absorb. They're very needy. They have no power. Reality should be perfect, it's not. Anti-dependence, need less, want less. I have a lot of needs, but I cannot meet them. At the end, the problem is that here we have control from arrogance, here we have control from submissive manipulation. And it's not bad or good, it's just what happens if some child is put into that position by the system. And then it's a matter of time we rebel. This is enough. And this is what we call bad behaviors. They're not bad at all. There's the last solution, the only recourse, and it's a matter of time the rebellion is going to start. So, I feel this is enough. I'm really less than. I'm going to be invulnerable. I don't want the pain again. And the way I do it is to prove the rest of the world that I'm really bad and they're going to have to suck it up. And I'm dependent on all that system. And it's very out of control. So, wounded child, things affect self-esteem. Boundaries are not in place. Reality sucks. We're very dependent because no one is actually meeting our needs. So the less they meet our needs, the more dependent we are on to, hey, come on, rescue me. And this is not working. Yeah. And we're out of control all the time because it's not bearable. The brain does not compute. And then we adapt into that. And it changes with others and within ourselves and within time. So this is very dynamic. It never stays it's rare that it stays stable. You have a pure hero. It usually varies over time. So again, that's a good tool to work with clients because you can ask them, you think you've been there? Okay, and then there's 4 central questions that we shall always ask, working with adverse childhood experience. You take each major caregiver, mom and dad first, others, and we need to mark that. The best memory, the worst memory, the milestones, what we wanted we never got, and how did we manage to get the approval? And if you ask those 4 questions, you start to have the corners of your exploring land with the client. And you do that cognitively, but also you do a little bit of inner work, as in just close your eyes, try to remember how it felt, how it was, visualize the moment with your mother. As I did with the guy who proposed me the world in their hand. I just have to close my eyes and I see him again. And then I feel, because if I talk and I remember, I don't feel. I need a moment within myself to reaccess the feeling, how it felt. So close your eyes, go back there, visualize mommy in this very best moment. How did it feel? Oh, that was amazing. And what was the event? Well, one time in the year she will bring me at school or pick me up at school. And one time in the year, that's not a lot. So scarcity of good moments. Worst memory. Well, every night, mommy was crying because daddy was drunk. And that's the worst memory is every night, and this one is one in a year. What did I wanted? Attention and love. How did I get the approval? Waiting. So you want to ask that. And then you map that. You just try to understand where your client is on those spectrum, from the most negative experience to positive experience, the unmet expectation. The unmet expectation that's still expected 40 years down the road. This ripples off a lot in adulthood. I still want someone to love me the way mommy did not love me. And then you're going to go from one woman to another, try to replace mommy. 7 divorces later, it's not happening. And then we adapt, which is, the adapted role, including addiction, including behavior, some can be bullying as well, can be trying to be the most popular guy at school. This is what kept us alive. It has not, never shame it. It's so important to validate the fact that there's a teen and a young adult and an older young adult who did a fairly good job, wrong decisions, but good job to keep us alive. The reason why I'm here, guys, it's because when I was 15 years old, 14 years old, I had the choice between swallowing those sleeping pills I have stolen from my father, and I had 100. And every night I was looking at the pills, saying, shall I swallow that and just call it a day? Or there's actually this little blonde girl here, and I had fun with that bottle of vodka the other day, and that was completely disruptive. But guess what? I didn't swallow the pills. It kept me alive. It kept me alive to an extreme point, so it became a problem by itself, but it kept me alive. So I have also to admire and be grateful to my inner self who carried the raging teens and the raging 20s for me. Yeah, that's an important thing. We have to create today a reality for the past when we work with clients around adverse childhood experience. We're not going back there and oh my God, what happened was terrible, awful. It doesn't help. We want an adult to look at the child and to say, yeah, you've been through that, it happened. I authentify the feelings, but I'm not creating adult feelings on the top of the child feelings. The way the child felt was good, bad enough. You don't want to go, oh my God, oh my God. As a clinician, if you go, oh my God, that must have been awful, you're going probably to send a message to the adult in front of you to be again, oh my God, that was awful, and it's going to just land into the past experience and create a big bubble of negative feelings. So it's about really creating a reality for the past. Again, as I said, how do we make the difference that the finger of my mother is not the finger of my partner? That's, it's not that easy. I mean, we know it, but yeah, I cannot get it. She's not around. Detach from old shaming messages, that's the main thing. Because how is it that a human being who came on the earth reasonably okay, growing up, develops such a negative opinion of himself? That does not happen organically, naturally. There's a message there, and we choose to believe the message. So we have to deprogram the message and the resulting pattern. Now, when I have someone saying, my main shaming message is I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. Right, okay, where's this coming from? Well, actually, my granddad told me that. Okay, we got it. Now, what about today? What could you tell yourself instead of repeating the voice of granddad? Well, I'm good enough. Say, okay, let's try that. Voice it out. I'm good enough. What's coming up? Oh, the not is behind. So by saying the contrary, I'm not good enough, into I am good enough is actually not working because the not is still subconscious in the background. So we have to find another affirmation message. We have to be hugely creative with our clients here. What about your capacity to learn and to try? Oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm trying my best, Oh, right. Okay, so I'm not good enough. Affirmation message, I'm trying my best. Now, we validate that by checking with the client because there's no by the book here. It's very individual. So we try to work around all that. Learn the skills which were not learned. So that's a concept. Our friend Claudia Black said one day, reducing the stigma from trauma, reducing trauma is a good start. But what has not been learned has to be learned. So all what I didn't learn around my family of origin, my team, my peers, and all that came up to me in my process of recovery. Oh, okay, I'm going to have to learn how to say no. I'm going to learn how to stop being a pleaser, because I've done that. I'm going to have to learn how to have sex sober. I'm going to have to learn a lot of things that never really happened. So let's be humble. The trauma thing starts when we have reduced the trauma, because there's so much thing to learn. Otherwise, we're going to go back to what we know. If we don't learn a new way to do things, we go back to the old learning. The old learning is a post-traumatic reaction. It's adapted roles. It's coming from the shaping of parenting. So then we go back, and this is when it's chronic again. But it's chronic because we don't give us the chance to learn another way. So that can be cognitive, that can be experientially as well, because we know very quickly, right? We know we have to do it in that way. I know I have to say no to this. Now, emotionally, there's something that prevents me from doing it. So I have to go deeper into my learning process. It's not a cognitive learning, it's an emotional learning. And this lands into, cognitive behavioral therapy. Great, don't get me wrong. But the landing short here, and we need experiential moments. We need to re-experiencing. We need to psychodrama, walk to do things. The other day I had a patient, she could not see her future. She was petrified. And I just got her to walk towards the door, to imagine the door of the future, to just handle the handle slowly, to breathe, to experience that little moment of walk, to open the door and visualize the future. And all of a sudden say, yeah, I think I'm going to go on holiday next month. But she was completely blocked cognitively. So we need to be hugely creative here. So that's an interesting one. So creating the past reality in the present moment, again, catching up with the past, that's breaking the denial, right? An opportunity for self-compassion. So there's no yes but here. That yes, it was awful. That's bargain. A powerful emotional processing tool because we need to visualize and go back to the emotions. Fear, sadness, shame, and anger. And then the new narrative has a space to be written again. It's called acceptance. Now, denial, bargain, sadness, anger, and acceptance rings a bell, the 5 stages of grief. I think at some point we have to integrate the mechanism of grief to any trauma work. Right, that's an example. So, I'm going to finish on that. This little baby is 18 months old. It's a case study. And he's quite kind of hope-connected, this interaction. We land here. I don't know whether you're familiar with Paul Ekman's work on micro-expression to read the expressions on the eyes and the mouth. This doesn't present very well. There's sadness here. There's an expectation. There's desperation. Now, I can tell you the background. There's a lot of abuse here, emotional neglect, sexual abuse popping up. Adapted, late teens, walled in, arrogance, seduction, trying to protect this one. And this one has been the betrayed one. Huh? And this presents quite sad. We're in the mid-30s, early 30s, and you can see the damages. The sadness is back again. The substance misuse is visible on the skin. There's anger here in those markers. And this man is close to take his life. That's me. I'm here today. I couldn't take any patients, so I just show you. Now, what is important here is that I do that all the time. I get my patient to bring photos. Why? It induces an emotional narrative, but also this is where we can start to talk to our past, to talk to our inner self, because I can talk to this one. Wow, I really love you. Yeah, I can see the sadness, and I can engage, and I can use those tools to emotionally process and tweak the narrative, as in inducing a self-compassion and really getting into this moment of grief. And it's all about empowering the adult to look after the inner child, the experience of the past, the memory of the child and the teen. So that's basically, I'm just going to pass on that. That's just a simple thing. Yeah, that's the last thing I want to show you. That's another very useful metric. So wounds as a child, you remember the photo of this little boy I was when I was 4 or 5 years old. The adapted, the two other photos. Now, the last photo, me today, is trying to be here. Instead of the teen trying to find a solution, drinking a bottle of vodka to soothe the wound here, I'm now here trying to speak to that adapted adolescent young adult, setting a limit here, so that this one can affirm and nurture the profoundness of the wound. Now, that's very simple. I'm not going to elaborate on that. Have a look at it, because if you show that to your client, they'll be happy as Larry, because there's a lot of strategies here that anyone can elaborate on that grid. Okay, I'm going to stop now with this. That's central. So I don't know whether you know that guy. He's central to my development and my professional awakening. He said that sooner or later we are going to have to give up the hope for a better past. We're not changing the past, for God's sake. We're not going, oh my God. We're just going, let's just rebuild the narrative. Let's drop that hope for a better past. This is the condition to build a future. Trauma resolution is in resilience. It's not in the past. It is in tomorrow, starting today. And that requires sobriety and abstinence, obviously, in order to be available to do that. So that's the link. Thank you.